It is September 2020, exactly half a year since millions of Canadians were laid off and went into lockdown due to the pandemic. What impact did the lockdown have on ordinary Canadians? We can read the stats and we know the unemployment rate, but what is really happening? How is this impacting real Canadians? Well, to find out, I've got a first-time guest, and it all starts right now.
This is Debt Free in 30. Here's your host, Doug Hoyes.
Let's get started. Who are you and what do you do?
I am Wendi Campbell. I am the Chief Executive Officer at the Food Bank of Waterloo Region.
Excellent. Well, Wendi, thank you very much for being here. You've come to our studio in Kitchener. I think you're the first external guest we have had since the lockdown started. We've got our plexiglass here, so I think we're going to be good. Our office, as we're recording this, is completely empty, so I think we're good. So I want to spend most of our time today talking about people, not the stats, but let's get the numbers out of the way first. I am an accountant, so we got to talk numbers.
Absolutely.
So I understand, based on your website, planning for the food bank started during the recession of the early 1980s, and the Food Bank of Waterloo Region was officially registered as a nonprofit charity in 1984, and I'm quoting from your website here, as a short-term solution to obtaining enough food faced by the unemployed. Now, here we are, 36 years later. Mm-hmm. Obviously, we still have a serious problem. We're still here. So give me an idea, first of all, of the size of the food bank.
So our actual facility is a 31,000 square foot warehouse distribution center located in Kitchener on Alpine Court. It is the center of a community food assistance network, and that's what's really unique about the Food Bank in Waterloo Region. The Food Assistance Network is actually two food banks, so our warehouse distribution center in Kitchener, but also the Cambridge Self-Help Food Bank. And together we work with more than 100 community programs who are delivering programs and services on the front lines in every corner of this community, in the rural townships, in the cities. And those programs range from community food hampers to food cupboards, to community meal programs, to shelter and outreach, residential meal housing programs, just a wide range of programs that support individuals in our community who, for whatever reason, and a wide range of reasons, can't secure healthy food on their own.
And I want to talk about what some of those reasons are. But what you're saying then is it's not just one program where, I come and I get a basket of food. There's many different programs that are all interrelated. You're kind of the hub. Yeah. So how many people are we talking about who your organization would end up interacting with in the course of a year?
Yeah. So last year, more than 34,000 people in Waterloo Region access some kind of emergency food assistance throughout the community. And that's about 1 in 20 households, if you kind of break it down to give you sort of a perspective of the depth in the region. 35% of those people were children under the age of 18. And through the 100 programs that we're working with collectively, probably close to 5 million pounds of food were distributed throughout the region. And that works out to about 3.5 million meals were served locally.
Wow. So and 1 in 20 households, that kind of puts it in perspective. So it's a big number. So I've done more research on your website, which is great. And so I'm going to put a link to it on the YouTube video for those who are watching. Thefoodbank.ca is your website. And you've got some great charts up there that I've copied. And there's one that lists program visits. So it says that 28% of the people you help only visit the food bank once. Mm-hmm. 14% visit twice, 10% 3 visits. So that means that over half the people you help visit 3 times or less. So what has caused people to require temporary help? Give me a bit of a profile of the person we're talking about here.
Wow. How much time do we have? There's so many reasons. I think the interesting thing about that stat is that I think there's a misconception in the community that food banks have, and food banks are, quite frankly, the part of the social safety net. People who don't have the economic means to secure food for themselves and their families need to access food assistance programs. But for some people, it is only once, twice, or 3 times a year because it's a blip. Something has happened. Somebody has lost a job. A paycheck didn't come in when it was supposed to come in. An unexpected life circumstance. So maybe you could have a family where the income earners are, earning a lower wage, might not have benefits. What if somebody gets sick in that household with no benefits and the cost of medication is more than that family budget can manage? What if something breaks? What if a car breaks down or a pipe bursts or something needs to be replaced unexpectedly? There's a number of families in our community who are living very, very close to that line where they do need additional supports. And so when something, they're balancing, they're doing a great job. They're balancing their income, they're balancing their lives. They have support from friends and family, but sometimes they need support from community too when these circumstances happen.
Yeah, and I like your word blip because I get asked the same question. Okay, why does someone come in here because they have to go bankrupt or file a consumer proposal? And I use the word hiccup. Yeah. Which is kind of the same as the word blip, I guess. Blip is better. It's one syllable. So I'll have to start using that word probably. And it's exactly what you described. Things are going along okay. I'm kind of living on the edge, but I'm keeping up. I'm okay. And then something happens. And it may be I lose my job. And of course, it takes a couple of weeks for EI to start or whatever. Yeah. Maybe I've gone through a separation. A medical issue is a very common one. We think here in Canada, well, Medicare is, medication's free, or healthcare is free. Well, no, certain things are free when you go to the hospital. Prescriptions aren't free. A wheelchair isn't free, all the rest of it. So if you do need that kind of help, well, I got to buy my medication. What do I do? The food budget is something that ends up not being met. So is that one of the biggest misconceptions you see then? That because in my world, everyone says, oh, well, I guess the reason someone had to go bankrupt is they're, lazy, they're not working, they're homeless. No, it's not that at all. It's much more income challenge. What are the misconceptions you see?
Well, I think some of those things are so interesting when you start to break it down. So some of the questions that we like to ask and get people to think about is, why is someone homeless? What happened to that person way back, however many years ago in their lives, that have led them to be homeless? You don't grow up and choose to be homeless. You don't grow up and choose, not to work. We all, hope that we're raising our families to go to school, to get educated. To be able to find a job, to be able to support ourselves. But for a lot of people, that didn't happen in their lives. So maybe there was family breakdown. We talked about family breakdown already. Maybe there was a family breakdown. Maybe there was an abusive situation. Maybe there were significant health issues in a family that prevented somebody from making those choices in life to be able to work, to be able to be educated, to be able to find a home. It's complicated. And we could talk for hours about some of the stories that we've heard about the complexities way down those root causes of why people are accessing food services. So the blips are one thing, people who are really, really trying so hard to make ends meet, who have had an employment income, but something has happened, have to rely on EI. But then there's other situations that are deeply rooted in childhood trauma and life experiences and poor health that are really, really tough to navigate.
Yeah, you're right. There's kind of two categories of people. The blip category where, something happened and that's a big chunk of the people who you deal with. They're back on their feet. It's all good. But then there are others with more long-term issues. And I think about it, and this would be a good question for everybody listening or watching to think about, what would happen if tomorrow you got diagnosed with a serious medical condition? Yeah. So, okay, well, I guess if you've got $100,000 savings in your bank account, then you're fine, right? And how many people have that? Essentially nobody. Yeah. So what would happen if effective tomorrow, you couldn't work, you don't have benefits that are sufficient to cover everything, and you've now got a 1 or 2 or 3 or 5 year recovery period. You got to wait a year for your surgery because it's Canada, and then you got the recovery period, and then and there's no job for you to go back to, and now you can't go back to the same job because of your physical limitations or whatever. It's those kind of chronic things that you hit the nail on the head. Nobody chooses it. Mm-hmm. It just ends up happening. And I think that's why your organization and my organization exists, frankly, to deal with those kind of situations. I was interested comparing the profile of the people you help with the profile of the people we help. And again, the numbers are on your website. I'll put some of the charts up on YouTube, but 51% of my clients are single. 49% of your clients are single. Okay, so it's pretty much exactly the same there. It's about a 50-50 split. Now, my clients obviously have debt problems, And even more than that, they have income problems. They're not earning enough to service their debt. The big difference I see is that my clients, 80% of them are working at the time they file a bankruptcy or proposal. They're just not earning enough to make ends meet. In your clients, and again, you got a great chart on the website here, and this is the source of income of emergency food hamper recipients. So that's kind of a pretty core constituency for you. Yeah. 31% of them are currently receiving Ontario Works, so social assistance for those people who are outside of Ontario. 24% are receiving payments under the Ontario Disability Support Program, ODSP. So that means more than half of your clients are in those two categories alone. Mm-hmm. And then obviously you've got, people with other issues. So how tough is it to survive on that level of support if your primary source of income is Ontario Works or ODSP?
And if you are a single person and do not have another source of income, a spouse or even something, a part-time job, it is incredibly tough. And I'll give you a scenario. A single male who is accessing Ontario Works is receiving about $825 a month in a social assistance benefit. The average rent in this community, which is one of the highest in the province, is $796. And I would argue that if you want something that is decent, it's probably higher than that. In Waterloo Region, there's a great study that the Region of Waterloo publishes every year about the market basket, the cost of a market basket of food in our community. For a single person, food costs on average $292 a month. So when you do the math, somebody on social assistance, a single income, paying a rent of close to $800 a month, they have $29 left for groceries for an entire month.
Groceries that cost $300.
Groceries that cost $300.
And you didn't mention things like clothing, transportation, anything. Hydro, like anything else to survive.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's not hard to figure out that the math doesn't work.
The math does not work. And there's all kinds of scenarios, and we look at scenarios every year about connected to that market basket. And we know that food prices are rising right now. They have been for a number of years, but COVID's done some very interesting things to food prices. It's going to get worse. So it's no wonder that those stats are as high as they are, that 55% of people need to access some kind of emergency food assistance because there's just nothing left. And the other challenge with individuals that are on those social support programs, obviously the disability one is very black and white. There's a disability that's preventing them from working. But the Ontario Works things, there's some complexities there. And again, when we talk about the trauma, there might be anxiety issues about being in a workplace. There may be a skill shortage and a skill gap that's preventing that person to work. So many reasons why they're unable to find adequate work. And when they do find adequate work, it's not adequate. So it's low paying, it's minimum wage. There's a number of employers in our community who are shifting to the living wage, which is phenomenal. It's been a game changer, I think, for a lot of individuals, but they're still not enough. And a lot of those low-paying jobs don't come with benefits. They don't come with that flexibility to be able to have the benefits that are going to help with those medications or help with those other emergencies. So, people end up getting stuck in a cycle, and it's hard to break. It's really, really hard to break.
Yeah, I totally agree. And we are a living wage employer here, and I totally support that. I mean, and the living wage is higher than the minimum wage because it's a not-for-profit organization that does it, and they do exactly what you just described. What does it actually cost to live here in this community? Because it's a different number for every community. What does rent and food and transportation and everything else cost? Here's what it costs for a living wage to survive. And, we totally support that. And I think the people listening, again, the numbers that you quoted don't seem like very big numbers. So I think for the average person, $796 worth of rent. Well, I can tell you that my clients are paying more than $796 in rent on average. I mean, that's just the way it is. Yeah. And $292 a month for food. Well, obviously that's only if you are buying food. You're not going to, take out a restaurant, anything like that, because then it would be hugely higher. So it's, it is a very serious problem. And it is a problem that in a lot of cases is due to no fault of the person in that situation. So, I'm an older person. I worked at the factory for many years. I got downsized because the work got shipped somewhere else. Well, I can't just go and become a computer programmer tomorrow. It doesn't quite work that way. Now, explain to me what the term food insecurity means.
So food insecurity is the inability of an individual or a household to have an adequate income to be able to go and secure food for themselves and their families, and to make choices that are appropriate for themselves and their families. So it's not just about having money to buy food. It's about being able to go to the store and buy food that might meet dietary restrictions, that might meet cultural preferences. But it's about income. So a lot of people talk about, we should just, food banks, why are we still here 36 years later? And it's about that food insecurity. And we will continue to be here until we can figure out ways for every citizen in our community to have that adequate income to be able to sustain themselves and their families.
So what do I need to do to put you out of business then? So let's say I've got the magic wand now. I've been appointed the prime minister, the premier, the mayor all at once. And so I can implement changes, or maybe it's not the government. Maybe it's something else that needs to happen. There is no magic wand. I get that. But what are some practical things that, because I know you have chats with members of the, MPPs and so on.
Yes.
What are some types of things that you suggest either to governments or to the business community or society at large that would go towards helping reduce food insecurity? And let me ask the question even more specifically. Give me one thing. Like if there was one thing, and I realize one thing isn't going to solve the whole problem, but what would be near the top of your list?
I think the top of the list. Oh, can I pick two?
You can pick two.
Okay, I got to pick two. I think at the top of the list would be basic income. So can we figure out systems and supports that provide everybody with a basic income to be able to provide for themselves and their families? But the second piece is housing, is a roof, an appropriate, safe place to live. I mean, food and housing are social determinants of health. They are key to our mental well-being, our ability to contribute back to a community. We need food and we need shelter, and we need adequate shelter. And if it's the one thing that we've learned in the last few months, well, we knew it already, but I think it just heightened it, working with our homeless population, our shelter and outreach support staff throughout the community, is that we have a serious problem in housing in this community and this country. And yes, there's been a ton of investments made by provincial and federal governments, and there's been some amazing partnerships. And I think that's the key thing with the magic wand. The magic wand isn't one level of government, and it's not one community organization. It is a collaborative. And I recently talked to some MPPs, and we talked about, our experience during the early days of the pandemic, working with the region of Waterloo and supporting the food piece of the regional pandemic plan. But it was a true collaboration of community partners, of local government partners, and provincial and federal government supports. And that made a significant difference in our ability to meet the needs during the early days of this crisis. It's that collaboration that's going to help us make change for the future. So
let's talk about the pandemic then, because we're recording this in September of 2020. So we're 6 months into the pandemic, and what
6 months.
I know. It's hard to believe. That's half a year.
Yeah.
So what was it like right when it hit? What is it like now? I mean, I assume at the your actual physical facility, people are wearing masks and physical distancing and all that sort of thing. What has changed as a result of the big bad virus for you?
Well, the beginning was the beginning was crazy. There's not a nice thing to say about what happened at the beginning. I called it beautiful chaos at one point, because it was hectic and it was complicated and it was busy. But we muddled through it. So at the beginning, our goal as a community food assistance network was to keep as many people as possible safe. So all of our programs sent staff home where they could send staff home. We actually reduced the number of programs in our community that were providing service so that we could help isolate some of the vulnerable volunteers in our community. And those larger programs really stepped up, and our team at the food bank stepped up we basically changed our operation overnight. So we shifted from putting together food orders for close to 100 community programs to actually packing perishable and non-perishable food hampers, to working with our agency partners to deliver food hampers out of the back of refrigerated trucks in the parking lots of community centers, which were now closed. We worked in conjunction with the region of Waterloo and a number of other partners to ensure that we had individual hot and cold meals available for our shelter and residential programs. A lot of those kitchens shut down. A lot of those kitchens that served congregate meals with large numbers of people couldn't do that anymore. So we started delivering close to 6,000 takeout meals every single week. So it changed everything about our operation, and we did it. We normally have close to 200 volunteers over the course of the week helping us in the community and in our facility. We went to 9 staff and 20 volunteers.
Wow.
Yeah. And we created a nice little germ bubble in our facility. We sent half of our staff home as a backup plan. We said, you guys go home and stay healthy in case we get sick. And we just buckled down this core group. And thank you to the volunteers and to the community partners who actually redeployed some staff to help us because we couldn't have done it without them.
So you said 6,000 takeout meals a week. And before that, it was essentially zero?
Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, that's what you mean by redefining the entire organization.
Yeah. We used to package, our food orders used to be, some meat, some buns, some fresh fruits and vegetables. And then all of that food product would go to a kitchen where staff and volunteers would prepare meals. Well, now we had to have somebody else prepare those meals off site, and then our staff would pick them up and deliver them. And
yeah, because obviously you can't have 50 people in a room assembling stuff. You've got to be physically distant. You got to, make sure that, so it's, yeah. And I mean, obviously your organization went through what every other organization went through, which was, beautiful chaos, to use your term. Mad panic would be the other. And you're right.
We tried to keep it positive.
Absolutely. Beautiful chaos. Well, and if you had a year to implement that change, you would have been able to do it.
Yeah.
Doing it in a week, well, okay, man, that was gas pedal to pedal to the metal kind of thing.
In a day.
Yeah, because you had no choice.
The good part about we actually did have a plan, and a lot of people thought I was a little crazy because I dusted off the plan in January, and one of our community partners said to me, he's like, did you have some sort of crystal ball? Like, how did you know? Because we actually started talking about the pandemic plan with our partners in January. We've had it for years. We started in 2006 with the region of Waterloo. We updated it in 2013 with our network, but people change. Volunteers change, staff change. So we pulled it off the shelf, we dusted it off, and we got ready as we could be. The challenge with pandemic plans were all the pandemic plans were written with the assumption that people were going to get sick. They weren't written around isolation and stay-at-home orders. So that was part of the challenge, was navigating. Our original plan was, well, anybody who has to shut down, all the healthy staff will come and help us and everybody will be fine. Didn't take into consideration the isolation piece of this. So
yeah, which was massive because everything was isolated. Yeah. That was the whole point. So,
yeah. But we figured it out, and now it's the same, but it's well oiled.
Yeah.
So we've got some systems in place. We're doing the same kind of work. We're slowly opening new programs. So programs that had shut down, slowly opening as they are ready. So we're not forcing everybody to work. We're making sure that people have access to food no matter where they live in the community. It just might look different than it normally did. But again, we have some small programs, some that are run out of churches, some that are run out of community centers. Some of the volunteers running those programs are still in the at-risk group. So we don't want to put anybody at risk, but we need to make sure that those who are able to work and provide service are still doing it to the best of their ability.
Yeah, which is an excellent way to do it.
Yeah.
Now, I said I wasn't going to talk numbers, but I want to talk numbers again.
Yeah.
Because I'm a CA, obviously, so I have to do this. So I took a look at your financial statements, because that's one thing I actually understand.
Excellent.
And according to your 2019 financial statements, if I'm reading them right, you had over $2.5 million in donations and fundraising. And if you were to value the amount of food donated, it would be another $12 million. Mm-hmm. And you have a revenue line there, $12,000 from the region of Waterloo, which is obviously virtually nothing in an organization of your size.
Yep.
But last year, 2019, I didn't see any direct assistance from either the provincial or the federal government.
Correct.
So how is it possible that an organization that is helping 1 in 20 households is getting essentially and historically essentially no money from the government? How are you pulling that trick off?
We are very lucky to live in this community. And that's the best answer to that question. We are so grateful for the generosity and support of our community. And it's everything from individual donors who make financial donations and food donations, corporate donors who make financial donations, who encourage their employees to get engaged, get involved with either a food drive or a financial donation matching program. It's the volunteer support that allows us to keep, our expenses low. If I had to replace our volunteer team in a normal year with full-time staff, I would have to hire an additional 20 or 25 full-time employees to do what we do. There's no way we could afford that, and we wouldn't be as cost effective as we are. So volunteer time is essential to that. But we also have we have a great development team who does some amazing work in fundraising and donor engagement and grant writing and working with foundations, working with our provincial and national food bank partners on opportunities to receive funding for different pieces of the work we do. It's a lot of it is, business strategy on my part, on making sure that I have the right team to be able to help us build those resources. It's about creating really great relationships with our donors. But at the end of the day, it's this community who continues to step up and support us financially so that we can keep things moving.
Now, I would assume that prior to the pandemic, you were able to do things like, well, let's have a fundraising dinner or something like that. Clearly, you can't do that now. Yeah. So how has the pandemic and how will it muck up your whole fundraising efforts going forward?
So we're doing a couple of virtual things. We aren't a big event organization, which I think is smart strategic decision many years
brilliant.
ago.
Good job on your part there.
Maybe I did have a crystal ball.
You nailed that one.
I grew up in events, so I know that events aren't the way to fundraise. Events are a great, a nice to have and a fun thing to have and a really great way to engage community. For us, it's a great way to get people in the building to help them understand the depth and the scope of the work we do, because it's pretty impressive. If things ever get back to normal and you want to come visit, I encourage everybody to come visit, but it might not be till next year, but we will welcome you with open arms when we can. So we've never really relied on events, but there are a few things that we are doing virtually. We are actually doing an event called Waffles in the Warehouse, which is normally in the warehouse. This year it's going to be Waffles in the Warehouse at home, where we'll have sort of some of the same content, the same format. We're just not going to have, a building full of people. So we've shifted some things online. We've shifted some of the things that we do by mail. Believe it or not, we do a lot of fundraising by mail, and it's a really great way to have a different conversation with donors and community about what we're doing and the impact of the work and how their gifts are supporting it. And we have been incredibly fortunate as a result of COVID to receive some additional funding from the provincial and federal government. So although it's not on the financial statements that are posted, you'll see that next year, where we were able, because of COVID, part of that emergency response across the province and across the country, we did receive some benefit from that. So that's really helping us with the additional expenses right now, the additional storage, the additional food purchase, the additional transportation, the additional staff time that it's taking to manage the needs of this community during this crisis.
Right, which is obviously a one-time thing because that won't continue going forward. Yeah. So if someone is watching or listening to this now, and maybe they're not in Waterloo, we got people listening from all over the world, but what would be your advice for someone who wants to help support the work of either your food bank or others? Is it better to, give us a cash donation? Is it better to give us food? What's your preference?
A little bit of everything. So I always say it's up to the individual, but we appreciate the financial donations. Obviously, we have a building to operate. We have trucks on the road. We have freezers. We have a freezer that has capacity for 165 pallets of food that we have to keep. That's pretty big. It's pretty big. We need to keep that cold. So we have operating costs, and we are pretty lean and mean in those costs, but they're there.
You can't operate a truck without putting gas in it.
Exactly. Somebody said to me once, you can't put turnip in a gas tank. So
well, you could. It just wouldn't do anything. It just
wouldn't do much.
Make a mess. Yeah.
So that's a piece of it. Food donations as well. So the $12 million in food donations, a lot of that comes from the food industry. We have some fantastic partnerships throughout Southwestern Ontario with the food industry. So a lot of the food comes from the industry, but we do still rely on some of those community donations. So, and if you're listening from a smaller community, sometimes those community food donations are a significant part of what your small local food bank relies on. There's a lot of small food banks in this country, in this province, and I've done a lot of work across the country who rely on their local grocery store. There might only be one grocery store in the community. That's where the food bank will purchase their food, but also where they will accept all their donations from the community. So if you have a chance to just pick up a couple of extra items when you're doing your grocery shopping, pop them in that food drive bin. It goes a really long way. And then volunteer time. I always encourage people to reach out to their local food bank and find out what's needed most and, try to sort of match your skills and expertise. If you can, there may be a fit for something that you're really good at that the food bank might not have on their team. But sometimes just an extra set of hands. We had an amazing, couple of amazing volunteers during the early days of the pandemic who we had to say no to a lot of volunteers. And I'm really sorry to all the volunteers we said no to, but we did create this nice little germ bubble and we were trying to be really careful. But we had a couple of volunteers who said, I'd like to come and help and I'll bring a truck. We're like, okay, you're in.
Yeah, you're there.
Right? So you may have a resource that would be incredibly valuable to that organization. And so it's always good to talk to somebody and find out what's the current state of that food bank or that food pantry or that food cupboard in your community. And every little bit helps. So
how do people find out more? Is the website the way to go? I mean, you do have a newsletter that goes out.
Yeah.
How do people get on that list?
So go to the website. Lots of information on our website. Give us a call, chat with somebody.
And so that's thefoodbank.ca.
Yep. And once you make a financial donation, we'll put you on a whole bunch of mailing lists if you tell us we can. Mm-hmm. And that is the best way to get information. We send letters out on a regular basis. We send newsletters out on a regular basis, just to keep everybody informed. And we want to tell stories in the community and tell the stories about those individuals. Tell the stories to really help spread that understanding of why there's still need in this community and why we need to exist as a food bank, but why we're working with 100 different community programs who are providing so many services. And the other thing I always ask people is to, share the stories too. You may have a better knowledge of the food bank than a friend or a family member or a neighbor. Help us to share those stories and doing stuff like this. We love doing, podcasts and interviews and having great conversations in the community because I think every little bit helps sort of break down those stereotypes and those misconceptions and leads to additional support that is really having an impact, especially right now.
Yeah, and it sounds like a little goes a long way. So you're helping one household out of 20. Well, that means there are 19 households out of 20 who perhaps can be helping out as well. So it's not like everyone needs to donate 1 million pounds of food every week.
No.
A little bit from everybody goes a long way.
And I also look at it as if 1 in 20 is currently needing assistance, how many of those other 19 may need our help down the road? Maybe not this year, maybe not next year, but maybe in 5 years or 10 years. And some of those stories are the stories we hear of people who say, 20 years ago, my parents had to get a food hamper from the local community center. We're so grateful for that support. And now we're going to give back. Now we'd like to volunteer. We'd like to make a donation. We hear those stories all the time. And that's what's so great about this community is that we are supporting each other. We're feeding our neighbors. And we're starting to understand that hunger can happen on any street. It can happen to anybody in this community, whether you're in the downtown core, if you're in a rural, community. It can happen to anyone. And especially right now when we're all questioning what's going to happen next.
Yep. And I don't know.
And we don't know.
I don't have the faintest clue. I'm like the weatherman. I don't know what the weather's going to do in 2 hours, let alone 2 days from now.
Exactly.
And you're right. Again, we said the number already. 28% of the people who used your services last year only visited once. So that means 1 in 20 this year is going to be a different 1 in 20 next year and the year after and the year after that. So there is no doubt that somebody you know, if not yourself, but somebody you know has been helped by the organization. So again, the more we can do, the better. So.
Yeah, absolutely.
Excellent. Well, Wendi, thanks very much for being here. Really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me and getting me out of the office for the first time in
Finally,
6 months.
You've escaped. So for people who are watching or listening outside of Kitchener-Waterloo, if I'm not mistaken, there are 130 member food banks in Ontario, so you can find one near you at feedontario.ca.
Yep.
Or across Canada at foodbankscanada.ca.
That's it.
So, and of course, your organization is listed on that as well. And so I'll put links to everything we discussed today in the show notes on YouTube, on the Debt Free in 30 channel. So, Wendi, thanks very much for being here.
Thank you.
Let me conclude with this. If things are going well for you, it's easy to think that people in need should work harder and pick themselves up by their bootstraps, but that's not always possible for the reasons that we just talked about. I mean, we talked about the numbers. Over half the people who use the food bank use it only 3 times or less. It is a temporary blip, but then there are also people who use it on a much more long-term basis. The people who are using it tend to be people who are getting Ontario Works and ODSP. That's not enough to survive, which of course is why they are getting assistance from the food bank. I wanted to do this podcast to get the word out there that there are some people that need a little bit of help. Some people need a lot of help. And as we talked about, the events of 2020 have kind of shaken things up. It's totally different than what it was. So I think we should all do whatever we can. Some can do a little, some can do a lot. You already said it. If you can make a donation of food or cash, great. If cash is tight, but you can volunteer, maybe won't be till next year that you're accepting lots of volunteers, but that's something you're going to need as well. I don't think you and I have the big solution to the problem. You threw a couple of ideas out there, and when we have 47 hours, I'll have you come back and we'll talk about all those. But I think if we all do our part, then that's what we can do. So that's our show for today. Thanks for listening. Until next week, I'm Doug Hoyes. That was Debt Free in 30.